Thanks for joining me. So basically, I am in an art class and I am preparing to work on this view of Florence, Italy. It's a countryside view and looking far off into the distance to the mountains that you see. And this that I'm touching right now is the farthest distant clouds. In the picture I can actually see that there's water areas, very tiny water areas far in the back. The trees actually have a value that changes from light to dark depending on how the light is hitting them. From the right it's hitting and it's casting a bit of a shadow on the foreground or on our left side, front left side, but the top right seems to be in light a little bit more. So I'm adding, even to the tiniest trees in the far distance, those values of light so that they have shape and so that now I'm getting a little more busy with the color, being a little more generous with it. When I put it in a few places, I try to take that color around in other places that I see it as well. On this grassy patch, the value of that green is a little deeper than what I have on the paper, so I'm starting to add that as well. And now I think we're going to do a little search for the right colors so that they really line up to and look real similar to what it is that I see in the photo. Those values of green are a little bit blue-green and they're intense in color, they're deep in color. So I've gotten something in my hand now that is a little richer and darker in color, and I'm starting to add that into areas that I see the darkest tones, and a little bit more generous with it, not to be afraid of the color, but just to really start to wash it in the places that I see it. It's interesting to work with the various colors, and I love what that's doing to the landscape. It's changing the landscape, but it's also giving it a feel, an art feel that is personal to me, a little different than the actual photo, but something that adds a little bit of rich variation in color. Now I'm bringing that light lime green down in a few areas. And here in the very foreground, there's billows of trees. It's foreground, but it's very distant because where I'm standing to take this photo is way up high, looking down on the countryside and from a walkway. In a city that is built overlooking this scene. The little city or town that we were in felt like a castle, and it had great walkways, and it was very protected from this countryside area that I'm actually painting and that I photographed. between those trees, the grass, it shows through, and so I'm filling in those areas. The actual paper is kind of a yellow orange, and so I'm disappearing that paper by adding the color and eliminating the paper showing through in areas where it doesn't need to. I also noticed that in that little fielded area, the field has a real dip in it. As it rolls over and toward the foreground, it has a shadow in it of teal. And this area that I'm working on now has, those little bushes seem to be planted in kind of rows, and so I'm working to kind of gray them up. They're not really a bright yellow green, but more of a grayed blue green. It's interesting how when you're working on a project like this, you see different things as you work on it. More and more things come to life and come to light before your eyes, and you start to see detail more intensely as you work on the project than you did in the beginning. So I see I was a little distracted looking over at the values of the building, because the building, this particular side that's closest to us, is so much in the darkness and is so deep and rich in value, but I don't really want to take it quite that dark. But I was looking at that in comparison to the value of the trees. They're dark and intense, and this clump of trees that I'm working on, they really are individual, but because they're planted so closely, they almost become a solid block of trees. So I see that they're individual, and it's real hard for me to go in and just fill them in as a block of trees, but I know as I work on the project, I realize that that was probably the direction to go in. Bringing these lighter greens over and in. I see the shape as I'm glancing. And I'm doing a little bit of smoothing and blending, but the majority of the pastel that I'm putting down is going to be blended by the next color that I lay over it, and by dragging of the pastel itself rather than blending with my finger. I'm allowing the colors to do the blending on their own as much as possible. Now this is interesting because here I have this orange tone out, and as I look at the picture and back down at the artwork, it's much more of a creamy color that I see in the photo, unless of course there's something, because it's very tiny, that I might not be able to see from this distance. But oh yes, there is. There are, if I were to bring the picture real close, there are actually buildings there. And so it's the roofs of the buildings that are creating those light tones. And what I'm starting to do is I'm starting to put in the wall and the roofs lines of probably 4 buildings that are sitting in that area. Once the roof lines go in and some of the windows that I'm putting in, it's interesting because the whole foreground with that little bit of architectural detail starts to really tell a story about that countryside and the fact that individuals are living there, and it's a small community as well. When I put the roof lines in, I'm angling my marks in the direction that the shadows are revealed in the roof line. And then where the light hits the roof, I vary the color just like I would where the light hits the actual wall of the building. I vary the color because some of it is in light and some of it is in shadow. I'm not trying to be as detailed as maybe even what I see. I'm trying to be expressive with the art and creative and take art liberty. And after each session, I hold up this mat board to get a visual of how far I've come along. So thanks so very much for joining me, and hopefully you'll join me again next time. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe for more videos, and have a wonderful day. This has been Jane Curl Art.